So Travis asked me if I would come up and kick things off, just to say a few words to get the day going and to explain why I think that you should be taking this whole subject, this whole sector, quite seriously. So I've said many times that we need an identity infrastructure that deals with the realities of the modern world. An identity infrastructure for the nth industrial revolution. I can't remember it. N is like 4, 5, 6. I don't remember, depending on which. But you know what I mean, like the new industrial revolution, the N+1th industrial revolution. I don't want to sound too depressing, but it looks to me like in the sector right now, things are going from bad to worse. And so we need an infrastructure that's going to really make a difference, that's going to make the private and public sectors somehow come together and work to actually fix some problems. And personally, I think if they won't come together to do that, then I think they should be made to, but that's a point for another day. I'm not standing here flattered to be asked to give this keynote because I think, look, if we can get digital identity together, it'll be a little bit easier to log in to do our taxes, right? I mean, I know some of you are kind of focused on that area. I'm here because it's vital national infrastructure. We don't have very long to get our act together on this infrastructure, and frankly, we're starting from scratch. This is a country where people still think having a social security number is some sort of security device when you go to... I checked it. They wanted ID. I showed them the expired building pass for our office in Manhattan, and that got me in through the door, right? So it's not like we have this infrastructure we have nothing at the moment. Now, I have to say, in the UK, we have no tradition of identity cards or identity infrastructure of any kind. In fact, to the British, this whole kind of identification thing it's a bit sort of papers, please. It's like we associate it with authoritarian tyrannies, wartime, France. And even in wartime, the idea of requiring people to present some sort of identification. And I said this, they told them, can you show ID? And I'm like, no, because I'm not living in North Korea. I'm just trying to, but it's Vegas and you have to, just with a card, just to buy a few dollar coffee, you have to show identification to go with it. Everything's broken. But to us, it's incompatible with our customs and practices as proud subjects of Her Majesty. And the last time the British had identity cards, in fact, the two last times the British had identity cards, it was because of wartime. And we had identity cards because they were a means to some other thing, what John Agar calls a parasitic fatality, because we needed rationing or mobilization or something. That's how we got identity infrastructure, because we were kicking and screaming about it. Identity wasn't an end in itself. It was a means to support a war effort, which is quite an important thing. Now, that dislike of identity is like a state function. That's not a British thing, because that's true in America as well. It's also true in Australia. There's plenty of countries where that kind of common law resistance to identity means that we have no infrastructure. But I don't mean by that the alternative is what we want. A great many people around the world live in countries where they have state infrastructure of identity. And I'm not saying we should transport that into cyberspace either. That's not the best way of doing things either. I mean, in some cultures, not in this one. What I think is if the development of digital identity infrastructure is only possible as part of a war effort, certainly in our countries, then you have to recognize we're actually in a war now. We're in a cyber war. World War III has already started, but people haven't noticed because it's all going on in the matrix. It's below the surface. There was no date when it started, and I can't give you any conceivable date when there'll be an armistice when it will end. But as Bruce Schneier said in his superb book, Click Here to Kill Everybody, which came out last year, as Bruce said, cyber war is the new normal. I have to say, by the way, it means that the war movies that our kids will be looking at won't be so much fun. Like we had things like Saving Private Ryan and the Dam Busters, And they're going to be looking at movies of people in their underwear eating tuna out of a can and typing Perl scripts into. It's not really the same, you know what I mean? But the point is, it is a war, right? And the reason this war has broken out is not because computers and communications networks have only just reached, our armed forces. The very first computers were developed to compute ballistic trajectories. They've been doing this since day one. And actually, part of my young life was spent working for GCHQ and NATO, trying to figure out how to keep computer and communications systems securely connected in the event of a first strike against command and control infrastructure. And which actually, to some people, this is why when people start talking about white noise jamming and spread spectrum infrastructure, it still has a little bit of a frisson to me. I sort of rather miss the Cold War when you knew who the good and bad guys were. It was very comforting in a way. But in those days, the whole point of trying to knock out NATO's command and control infrastructure was so you could send tank columns through the Fulda Gap or drop the Spetsnaz into Downing Street. There were cyber aspects to that war, but it wasn't a cyber war. Now we're in an all-out cyber war. And like Niall Ferguson said in his book, The Square and the Tower, he said, it's a war between networks. Now, I'm sure that behind the scenes, the Department of Defense have been working round the clock to secure all of the vital national infrastructure. But it turns out the enemy didn't storm the Fulda Gap. They stormed Facebook. And conventional defenses may not have been absolutely optimal to resist these new threats. Or I don't know if I'm allowed to make jokes like this, but I sort of think you do need a wall, but you need it around data, not around Texas, because you've got to think about the future. Marshall McLuhan saw this coming just like he saw everything else coming. In 1970, McLuhan said, World War III will be an information war with no distinction between military and civilian infrastructure. He was absolutely right about this. It's a war where the subversion of the enemy's assets, the control of them, are more important than their destruction. Social media are creating completely new opportunities for what The Economist calls influence operations. And that's how we can see that war being fought into the indefinite future. While I was actually writing this a couple of days ago, all right, at breakfast, fair enough, I admit, it was... I was reading yet another set of stories about bots controlling accounts on Twitter and Facebook being deployed in order to subvert who's supposed to know who's a bot and who isn't in this? 25 years downstream from in the cyberspace, no one knows you're a dog. We still don't. In fact, not only do we not know if someone's a dog, we don't know if someone's a bot controlling a fridge controlling a dog. It's like we've compounded things to be even worse in that intervening period. So how do we tell us from them? How do we tell real from fake? How do we tell insiders from outsiders? How do we tell attackers from defenders? We need to create an effective digital identity infrastructure as a matter of urgency, and it shouldn't be framed in the context of a 20th century bureaucracy kind of reacting to the urban anonymity of the Industrial Revolution with this index card notion of what constitutes a person. We need something that's based on McLuhan's concepts of digital identity founded in relationships in an always-on, interconnected space. And we need an infrastructure that delivers both privacy and security into that space, because they're the twin pillars that these defenses are going to be built on. So my challenge to No ID, which is a conference I take very seriously and an audience that I respect greatly, is that I'm looking to you to man the barricades. I really am. I want you to begin, I'm too old, someone else has got to take over the baton. I want you to begin the process of assembling this infrastructure that we desperately, desperately need, so that I can tell my email package to ignore messages that they say came from the bank but didn't, so my web browser can put a red line through news that isn't, and I can set my phone to ignore tweets that come from people that are not. It's got to be at that kind of level. And if that all sounds a bit over-dramatic, talking about cyber war and so on, I think it's perfectly reasonable to interpret the current state of cyberspace in these terms, because the foreseeable future is one of continuous cyber attack from state and non-state actors. This is what I meant at the beginning. Like, if you think digital identity is about making it a bit easier to log into the bank, you are so wrong. Digital identity is a fundamental building block in our defenses. And I hope over the next couple of days, you'll find some new ideas, new ways of cooperating, and perhaps even a few new mission statements to help us protect and survive in this new era of amazing opportunities, threats, and frankly, quite terrifying risks. Digital identity isn't fun. Well, I mean, you can tell that from my talk already. Digital identity isn't fun. It's deadly, deadly serious. And I want you guys to really rise to the challenge of seeing digital identity in its real context. So just to echo Travis's point, thank you very much for joining us all here today in this, in my opinion, vital discussion.